Um, I want to give a little bit of a preface for tonight's lesson. Let you guys know, as awkward as it is for you guys to hear stuff like this, it's just as awkward for me to teach about it. But we're going to go over some statistics to hopefully show you guys that this is important. This does affect us, and it's not just people outside of the church dealing with it. We are going to go over Leviticus chapter 18. Where God details out sexual immorality and what He has declared sexual immorality. And then we're going to be talking about porn and the prevalence of it in not only in our culture but in our churches as well. So we're going to be looking at stats to hopefully emphasize how big of an issue this is. Following up this lesson, just because of the nature and how important it is, I will be next week putting some of the resources that I got, the statistics and stuff. I'll be making up a little page that'll be on our website. I'll also be posting links to different resources for people struggling with it. Because, I don't expect anyone to, publicly announce it. However, if you have that kind of strength, more power to you. I also want to say, as we're going over these things, that this is why we have confession. It's what makes it important. It's so easy to deal with these things in the quiet of your own home or behind closed doors. Confession is a way for us to share how much we're struggling with other people and to gain strength from fellowship. It's also a way for us to have people check in on us and hold us accountable and help us to steer clear of decisions we shouldn't be making. So with that, we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 18. If you've got your Bibles, I invite you to follow along with that.
Leviticus 18?
Yeah. So starting in verse 6, Leviticus reads, "None of you shall approach any of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness." So this phrasing, to uncover one's nakedness, that's a phrase that means to have sex with. All right, so that phrase, to uncover your father's nakedness, what he's saying there is you're not to sleep with your mother. "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's daughter, whether brought up in the family or in another home. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, for their nakedness is your own nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, brought up in your father's family, since she is your sister. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother, that is, you shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter, and you shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are relatives, and it is depravity. And you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive. You shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness while she is in her menstrual uncleanliness. And you shall not lie sexually with your neighbor's wife and so make yourself unclean with her. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. You shall not lie with any animal and so make yourself unclean with it. Neither shall any woman give herself to an animal to lie with. It is perversion. So with that very awkward passage to read, I'm going to be shifting this and using pornography primarily to give us an indication of how prevalent some of these issues are, because it's really easy to read through that and suggest that it's not an issue. How many of us have slept with a close relative or our stepsister or a sibling? Did you have something to say?
It's amazing how many of this list are things that he had condoned before.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is new information to them for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So to make my point of this is in fact an issue, most of this passage is talking about what we would call step siblings, right? And most of us would say, well, that's not a problem. I've never desired to sleep with my, step sibling. But 57% of consumed pornography in the last year was centered around step siblings. 57%. Now we go to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 8, when he talks about lusting after a woman is the same as committing adultery. And I would suggest that it's just as much of a problem today as it ever was. That 57% of people are indulging in these kind of fantasies. Now so I'm going to read through some of these things because pornography is something we don't really like to talk about. It's kind of a subject we don't really like to consider. When we do talk about it, it's well, this is a sin, stay away from it, and that's kind of the end of it. But here's the thing. On average, the average age of a child who is first exposed to pornography is 11 years old. 11 years old. I don't know how many of you guys remember how impressionable you were at 11 years old, but that's pretty detrimental. Right? If our job is to take children and teach them the ways of righteousness, that's what we're combating. Not only open exposure to these things, but free access to it. That's an issue. I don't know if you guys are in your minds thinking that it's not or hoping that it's not for you, but it is an issue. 11 years old for the average age of first consuming pornography. The largest age group of pornography consumers in our society is between the ages of 35 and 50. That's a huge margin. That's the vast majority of people. Now here's the thing. There's also, one of the arguments that at least came up in my head was, well, yes, the world is going to indulge in those things because it's the world. But Christians, we know we're not supposed to do this. 1 out of 5 youth ministers admits to regular use of pornography. 1 out of 7 senior ministers or regular ministers, adult ministers, admit to the same. In the church, these are stats for people who call themselves Christians. 57% of men are watching pornography on a regular basis. Women, you're not exempt from this. 34% of Christian women are watching pornography. 27% of men admit to watching pornography in the workplace. You compare that to 17% of women. So this isn't just depravity behind closed doors and the safety of one's home environment. This has such a grip that people are risking their financial stability of their family in order to indulge in it. 9.4 million clicks a year from female users. I'm giving that stat because women are the lower stat. 9.4 million times women users have clicked on pornography, and that's just what we can measure. Now, some of the resources out there, things like Family Safe, I don't know if you guys are aware of what that is. It's an organization that tries to attempt to help withdraw some of the worldly conduct from our homes. And so you can go there, they'll review movies, and they'll tell you of instances of swearing or violence or sexual conduct. They actually detail that out for you so you can review movies before your family watches it. Different stuff like that. They also do a lot of research. It's actually where most of my stats come from. There's also another resource called Covenant Eyes. And this resource is meant for Christian men and women who are seeking to come out of an addiction to pornography. And Covenant Eyes is a resource where you download a program and basically you have a sponsor like you would any addiction, and they have access to all of your search history. And the idea is that gives you some level of accountability to somebody who can offer you support without judgment. Covenant Eyes reports that 53% of its users use pornography at least within the first year. That's people who know somebody's watching. Now, obviously, 100% of these people are struggling with pornography. That's why they're on the program. But 53%, knowing somebody is watching what they're doing, are still doing it. So even if you yourself don't indulge in this activity or whatever, chances are somebody in your household does. Even if somebody in your household doesn't, chances are somebody in your immediate family does. Now, the effects of this are pretty profound. 83% of people admit to what most Christians would call sexually immoral fantasies. That's sexual violence, that's multiple partners, that's animal pornography, that's child pornography, all of these things. 87% are indulging in fantasies that we would call sexually immoral. Among Christian people who went ahead and filled out the report, there was no marginal difference. That's a lot. And we can't act blind to this and claim that it doesn't affect us or that it's not a problem. And as uncomfortable as it is to talk about, if our responsibility is to seek righteousness, to pursue righteousness, to learn more about righteousness, and to call out sin where it is, then we have to be aware of these things. You know, we have verses on homosexuality. This is just one of them in Leviticus 18 where he talks about homosexuality. There is, sorry, this is kind of difficult for me to keep going with, but there is an argument being made by people claiming to be biblical scholars. They have their degrees and all of that, but I would argue biblical scholar by the things that they're saying, who are claiming that the word homosexuality did not mean homosexuality, that the Greek word that we got actually pertained to child molestation. However, in the Greek, they didn't use a word for homosexuality. They used a phrase. That's why your more literal translations say the words, to lie with a man as a woman. Because the Greeks didn't use a word in the Koine to describe homosexuality. So we know that can't be accurate. God very, very clearly tells us that he's against homosexuality. This is another issue that impacts the vast majority of us. And it makes us uncomfortable to talk about because of how it impacts us. Because even if you're not guilty of it, chances are you know somebody who is. And it's so difficult for me to grasp this, and it's a large part of that is because of my personality, that we can call out some sin and not others. You know, if your, we'll just say nephew, steals from you or lies to you, you have no problem telling them that that's wrong. But your nephew tells you that he's a homosexual and suddenly the entire dialogue changes. Why?
Cultural norms.
Cultural norms. So if that's the case, if the problem is that culture has decided that this is appropriate, doesn't that make us guilty of not standing by God's word?
I think that's what the problem, as we have watered down God's wrath for certain things that, he stands against, in light of, not becoming, what's the word, politically correct, or whatever the, phrases are that they use. We're supposed to love everybody, accept everybody how they are, And that's true, but we don't have to accept what they do. And I think over the years, it's been watered down, and the church hasn't preached about it either. So,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think we preach enough about fire and brimstone when it comes to what really irritates God, you know.
And how much more terrifying we would all be if we could just see a glimpse of what was waiting for us. Personally, I think it has a lot to do with relationship. A lot of times we're afraid of destroying a relationship with somebody. Now, here's the thing. It's a large part of what Brother Gilbert has said. Cultural norms dictate, culture tells us that stealing and lying is wrong. Even if we don't go to the Bible, the entire society says that it's wrong. That's why you go to jail if you do it. Right? You're getting your wish. We're talking about theft. But culture doesn't do the same thing with sexual immorality. It praises it. Let me just bring this one up. Sex workers have exponentially increased over the last 3 years. Mostly, I think, due to things like TikTok and a site called OnlyFans. These sites allow amateurs, people who aren't professional, to get into that industry. The top grossing sex worker last year made $3.5 million. Think it's not a problem? You might think about that's how much she's making, but what I point out is that's how much people are spending. Even in a culture or environment where it's free access, you can get it for free, people are still paying for it. That's how far this depravity has gone in our society and amongst our kids. And it's something for you to be aware of. We need to be aware of the tools that society uses so that you can watch for these things among the people that you're in charge of. Right? If your kid has an account with OnlyFans, I suggest you need to get on there and find out who they're following. Because that particular website started out as a way to promote artists.
What's the name of it?
It's called OnlyFans.
OnlyFans?
Mm-hmm. It was actually a way to promote artists. Artists would get on there, they'd show their work, and people would basically donate money to them to help fund their work. And it turned into nothing but sex workers, really. I bring this up because chances are you have a young person in your family that's indulging in this stuff and you have no idea. And if you've got a kid that has access to your credit card, you should probably be watching for that. So I think that this has a lot to do with relationship, right? As Brother Gilbert pointed out, culture says that these things are wrong. It says that sexual immorality is not wrong. And I use that as a blanket statement. Culture tells us that no sexual immorality is wrong, right? Women, if you want to cheat on your husband, I promise you'll find support for it. You can post it on Facebook. I promise you will have 100 women and men by the end of the day congratulating you for what you've done. Men, a little bit less so, because even men think you're garbage for doing it. But the fact of the matter is, society will glorify you. The problem is that if you're a Christian and you're struggling with these things or falling guilty of these things, it makes it that much harder to pull away from it. It makes it so much more difficult to stop watching porn or to stop committing adultery or whatever the sin is when you feel like no one around you is condemning it. Here's the thing. You're not going to ruin a relationship with a relative by telling them that lying and stealing is wrong. But you start talking about how homosexuality is not okay, you might find yourself in a different place. You start telling them that they've got to stop watching porn, you might find yourself not talking to them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's part of one of the problems too, is if we stand up, and we should stand up regardless of what the consequences. You have people in government in high places that we find out about it, those types of things.
Absolutely.
You know, so be it, Jesus said, shake the dust off and people are gonna hate you because of it.
Sure.
Yeah, but shaking the dust off sometimes has effects that can, like the cancel culture, they'll cancel you, you won't be able to get onto an account. And if that account is part of your financial income, a lot of people you can get devastated from just being persecuted.
Go ahead, Dave.
Some of the figures you were talking about are correct. 57% of people call themselves Christians are involved in internet pornography. How are we going to turn around and say homosexuality is wrong?
It
We're engaged.
paints us as hypocrites. No. To indicate to you how uncomfortable I am right now, Carlene brings up a good point. The wrong person walks into this church right now, and I could stand charged of crime for saying these things. I appreciate that. So I point this out because I don't want anyone to mistake the idea that I'm enjoying this conversation and on any level, right? Go ahead, Dave.
Obviously, there's a struggle with this topic in people's lives. And knowing that other people struggle with that should help us. Because if you're struggling with this, you might think, you know it's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but you're addicted to it, continue to practice it, thinking, well, they understand. Obviously, everybody else is fully
Yeah.
struggling with this. And so, starting to talk about how huge the problem is, helps us understand that we're not on
Yeah.
struggle.
I think you make a good point. We emphasize how we're supposed to be a family, right? So I start out every one of my lessons by saying good evening or good morning, family, because it's important for us to recognize us as that. And one of those reasons is we go back to the fact that you're going to lose relationships talking about this. But do you want to maintain a close relationship with somebody who continues living a life of sin? Because to do so means that you stay silent. That's what we're talking about here. Or do you rely on your family who understands exactly what you're talking about? Do you hate your life enough to give it up? Go ahead.
I was just responding to Colleen because I feel like silence and kicking the dust off one's feet and walking away from something. But when you bring in the issue of direct confrontation,
Mm-hmm.
and man, I'll tell you, that's a typo walking over Niagara Falls.
Yes, it is.
And I am not defending the cultural norms, but I'm looking at my own life thinking, my gosh, it's so prominent, so pervasive. This thing about silence, I don't know about outside of the walls of our church family, but inside the walls of our church family, we say something like, that's not acceptable. We're not going to get chased down and hunted down and put out of business.
Right.
If you go outside of our family, our church family, and you make a direct confrontational kind of comment, instead of silence, you'll get
ostracized.
Yeah, ostracized and beaten up.
So my question for you, Gilbert, is how much are you willing to sacrifice for righteousness?
Well, what kind of sacrifice did you make?
I'm up here I just told you, me being up here talking about it risks me going to jail.
You're inside the walls of a protected.
And those doors are open. Anyone can come in there.
Well, I don't see that being outside in a cultural, social setting.
Okay, just for instance, I've had a lot of friends that have fallen sway to pornography. I've said the same things to them. So I understand what you're saying, but don't think I'm suggesting something I'm not willing to do. I'm well aware of the consequences of speaking up for what is sin and what isn't. And I'm only saying that because I've had to do it. Go ahead.
So back to what you were saying, you can only take as much away from you as you let them. I've seen creators who get canceled for speaking out against something, but they kept making content. They regained the followers they lost in days, probably months, probably in a year. They regained it. They can only take as much as you let them take.
Yeah, you'll lose a lot, but chances are, and this is one of the beauties of having fellow believers. If this is a business decision, is most Christians will come out to support you, and that's something we've seen in social media. People, he's talking about content creators. These are people. Those of you that don't know what a content creator is, these are people that make content on the internet. And they have enough people looking at their content that they can actually make revenue from it. Okay, so these are people that are living off of what they're putting online. And he's right, there's quite a few people that have been ostracized on the internet for speaking out against what they believe is wrong. But usually, if they stick with it, within a year or two, they find that they have an entire group of Christians that came out and started following them because they were willing to speak on those things. And that's the importance of the support that we find within our family. But the thing is, the second we are unwilling to go out there and say what is sin, is the minute we stop having a right to complain about it. If we're not going to go out and say this is sin, this is wrong, we don't do this, we shouldn't do this, if you're not willing to do that, then you've got to take the world for what it is. And God makes it pretty clear that we need to be able to speak out.
I think we're guilty as a church, not just our church, but the church as a whole, of categorizing and rating sin. Just like you said, we'll go out and, talk to them about abortion, we'll go out and talk to people about snorting coke, or, whatever the case may be. But this seems to be like, in our mind, it's a bigger
Absolutely.
sin. And it's not. I mean, it's a horrible sin. But and it affects more people, than some others.
Sure.
It could be privately sin. It just affects you, but they do affect the family. But with this, we categorize things, and that's not right. I mean, we should be just as adamant about stopping the cocaine user as we are. I should say stopping helping the cocaine user as we are helping the homosexual.
Sure. Or to drive the point even harder, if you know somebody who's been guilty of molesting a child, how do you respond to them? Because the vast majority of people I know respond with violence to that. In fact, I would argue that the vast majority of people I know in church have admitted that they would immediately respond to violence in the face of that. But God says the consequences for that and the consequences of lust are exactly the same. The steps to salvation from those actions is exactly the same. So if God is going to respond to it identically, why is it that we feel that we have a right to respond to one and not the other?
Now it's better blasted to the Holy Spirit.
I think it's not so much to be able to fight too, but we have the same problem with the life that we have in sin. When we have the life that God told us, things that are invisible are real, and things that are visible are not. And we perceive it all backwards.
Yeah.
We always have. And we always will until the day we die.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the actions that All of this has, both watching pornography and actually participating in the actions. We've all heard the stat 50% of marriages will end in divorce. That stat was accurate like 10 years ago. We're actually closer to 63%. Now, of marriages where sexual immorality is present, and I say sexual immorality because it might be adultery, I would, again, go back to the Sermon on the Mount and say pornography is a form of sexual immorality. Right? So in a marriage where sexual immorality is present, that number climbs to 94%. 94% of marriages where sexual immorality is present will end up in divorce because it's that hard to forgive. You think you're not affecting people? You think you're not hurting anyone? Your spouse feels a certain way. And I say this for women and men both. When you indulge in these activities, what you're essentially telling your spouse is that they don't meet the mark. They aren't good enough to keep you satisfied. They aren't fulfilling your needs. That's what we tell our spouses when we indulge in these things. How are they supposed to respond to that? Personally, I think it's one of the reasons why sexual immorality is the one thing given to us where God says, I will allow divorce if it's because of this. You are actually the least victimized person in that situation. Because your spouse is now going to struggle with all kinds of different things. Not just feelings of inadequacy, but self-esteem goes down. The outlook on marriage itself goes down. The ability to engage in any kind of relationship starts to decay. You've now presented a massive stumbling block to them. And men are the primary number of people who are engaging in this. And we're supposed to be the spiritual leaders. We're supposed to be the protectors. We're supposed to be the guardians who protect our families from that kind of thing. And women, I want to tell you something that, somebody's going to get upset with me because I'm not supposed to tell you the secrets of man, but here we go. Men are a lot less confident in themselves than we act.
Amen.
Especially sexually. It's not something we talk about. We're not told to talk about it. Most of us are taught, as guys, we don't talk about this except for with other guys, which, again, is also a form of sin. Because what goes on in my bedroom is not any of your guys' concern so long as it involves no one but my wife. But we're told, as men, that the only acceptable talk of sex is with other men. So we don't talk to our wives about it. We don't tell them when we feel inadequate or when we feel overburdened or when we don't feel up to the task or any number of things. And as a result, there's a rift that occurs in the relationship because of that lack of open dialogue. And this is important because this is why God tells us that we allow our spouses conjugal visits. This is why we're told your body belongs to them, their body belongs to you. Because the closer we are, the harder it is for that rift to occur. And that rift is nothing but a handhold for Satan. It is nothing but an opportunity for temptation to occur. So, with that in mind, I guess I'm pretty well done for the most part, but I do want to have a couple closing points. But I want to take a moment and offer you guys an opportunity to talk some more if you guys have some more things to say on this, or questions or suggestions or anything like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know that public schools are not a safe haven for godly teaching, right? Everyone's aware of that. I'm not going to blow anyone's mind by saying that. Yeah, so in public schools, there's a lot of things that are promoted that shouldn't be. First of all, the dating is outlandish. I'm just going to be honest with you. Kids that are 7 and 8 years old are saying, I have a girlfriend, I have a boyfriend, with no understanding of what that means. And the sad thing is, relatives promote that. You get together and, what, did you meet any cute boys? You got a girlfriend yet, Sam? Why would a 7-year-old need to be asked that question? But we do. I've witnessed it in a lot of different homes that I've lived in, where relatives, as soon as you get together for a family get-together, whatever that may be, holiday or family reunion or whatever, there's always some older relative going, you got a girlfriend yet? I'm trying to figure out multiplication. I'm a little overburdened right now than to be worried about having a girlfriend. Not to mention at that age, most of us are still convinced they're pretty gross. Go ahead.
I was thinking something, when our Nathan was in fourth grade, his first trip to Bible camp, and, the little girl Aaron says to him after, the whole getting was done and everything, she says,
Oh, okay.
She said, well, do you want to go to this thing? And Nathan says, go where? They locked the gate at night after supper. You can't go. He was so oblivious that was when he was littler. But the other thing I was going to say was this whole deal with boys, having great boys, and that, they make these magazines, and some dads keep them under their mattress or whatever. If you don't think those kids are going to find them, you're crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Dan never had any. I'm just putting that out there right now.
Did you check under his side of the mattress?
Yeah, I make the best. No, he didn't do that. But I know as my boys were growing up and stuff, I found things. And
Yeah.
I shut it down as hard as I could shut it down.
Mm-hmm. And we're in a whole different era. Because you're not going to find magazines under the bed anymore.
No, it's on their phone.
You think you don't need to know how to work a computer? You need to be able to search for browser. You need to at least know how to look up browser history. If you've got a young kid who's using your computer, you need to at least be able to find that.
This sounds terrible, but when my boys were home, I went through their pockets before I did their laundry.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at their wallets, I found some things that probably my teeth fall out a couple of times, some girlfriends, but they knew that just wasn't tolerated. So.
Yeah. But and I bring all this up because, like I said, we're responsible for teaching people. We're responsible for we'll call it discipling. We're responsible for discipling people. And that means teaching them what is right and what is wrong. Especially young people, who, as we already talked about, are having fewer and fewer positive, godly role models in their lives. It's fewer by the day. If you have the opportunity to be a positive role model, you got to pull out all the stops. You can't say, well, I'll be a positive role model and talk to them about this. It doesn't work like that. You're either going to talk to them about what God expects from them or you're not. You can't sell half the Bible. Here's something else I want to make a point out of. I remember when I was younger, and there was what everyone called the talk. Every boy got it from their fathers or some male role model, and a lot of us got it from several male role models, right? And the general idea of the talk is, we hear about what puberty does to us, we hear about girls, we hear about safe sex and all of this stuff. At least in my environment, without Christians involved, it was talking about safe sex, right? Whereas hopefully if you're having that talk, it's about not having it. there are a disturbingly high number of young men and young women who have no idea how any of this works. And I don't mean that in a positive way. I mean there is a disturbingly high number of young people that have no idea why sex is inappropriate for them. Could not tell you. And I think it started a long time ago. You know, in the 80s and 90s, we had, among church people, what we called purity culture. How many of you guys remember that time? Right? When girls would go around wearing purity rings to show that they dedicated themselves to a life of chastity. And I think they gave them to guys, too, at one point. Now, obviously, I was never a part of purity culture, but I do a lot of studying and reading on it in preparation to talk about this. One of the things I found is that purity culture primarily concerned itself with not causing sin in other people. They talked to young women about dressing modestly. And the argument that it was made, and is still being made, is that you dress modestly so that you don't tempt the young boys into sin. Now, that's a point, and it's not a bad one, but you missed the mark. You dress modestly to please God. Not tempting others is just a byproduct of that decision. But so often we forewent that argument, that statement, and said, well, you just can't cause other people to sin. Well, now people are in the next logical step of that conversation. Why am I responsible for your decisions? Women are asking, why am I responsible because he can't keep his eyes to himself? You know what? I don't really have a great argument for that. But you dressing modestly, it has nothing to do with that. You dressing modestly is about you following the instructions of God. Because that's what pleases God. Now, we talk about immodesty and how it doesn't have a place, or all of these things and how they don't have a place in the public school system. We talked about how this 57% of pornography consumed involved siblings or step-siblings. 21 involves student-teacher fantasies. And that didn't happen because teachers are dressing modestly. We have teachers that are now also sex workers. These are people that are teaching your kids, are making money on the side as a sex worker. Prostitutes are teaching our children, guys. And young boys and young girls are fantasizing about enough to go online and look at pornography to indulge in it. We have to be aware. And once again, if we're not willing to speak up against these things, if we're not willing to sit a young person down and force them into that uncomfortable conversation, and I'm talking to adults and I'm uncomfortable, but if you're not willing to sit them down and have that uncomfortable conversation, you really don't have a leg to stand on when they start indulging in those things and you know it's wrong. But it also starts with us. Because just as Dave pointed out, if we're doing it, we sure as heck can't make a good argument for why they can't. So, I want to conclude with this. The last couple of lessons I've given are all around this idea of sexual morality. It's difficult. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult to listen to. It's difficult to study through. It's difficult. And chances are, just going off of the statistics, chances are there are a number of people in this room right now that are struggling with this. But I want to afford you some hope, right? Because this is what Jesus Christ died for. So that we can be removed from those sins, so that those sins don't hold permanent sway over us and don't dictate where we go at the end of our lives. But more importantly, this is why Jesus Christ established his church. This is why we exist. It's not so that I can get up and preach a sermon every week. It's not. It's not just so we can sing songs. It's not just so we can feel righteous in the face of others who are off doing something else on Sunday mornings. It's not so we can get together and share a meal. It is so people who are like-minded and are convicted of the same thing can come together and support one another in those convictions and worship their God in community and fellowship. If you are guilty of those sins, if those sins are holding sway of your life, you have people here. You have a great number of people here that are directly invested in seeing you overcome that. We need to be able to learn to lean on each other. That's what confession is about. That's how we get to a state of repentance. If you find that you can't walk away from it on your own, stop trying to do it on your own. Because chances are, there's a good chance that whoever you do decide to confess to has struggled with it at some point or is struggling with it. And if they're struggling with it, that's all the better. Because they're just as ashamed of it as you are. Don't go home and struggle with these behind-door sins by yourself when there is help for you. Don't continue allowing yourself to live a life of guilt and feeling guilty because you are guilty when there is help for you. When there are people that care and are considerate and are invested in seeing you overcome it. Don't do them the injustice of not allowing them to be there for you through that struggle. That's all I have to say tonight. I want to open it up for last comments or questions before we close out in prayer. And I promise you this is kind of the end of this topic for a while, okay? All right, let's go to God. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to come to you, to lay our sins at your feet and to be forgiven of them. We thank you so much for the family of believers that you've blessed us with, for people who understand what it means to struggle with the evils of this world, for people who are of like mind and like heart. Lord, I ask that you be with each person here tonight, that you help to purify them, that you help to cleanse them of any temptation that is holding sway over them, that you protect them and guard them and guide them, and help us to do the same for them. Help us to be an open people, people who are willing to hear the struggles of others and to be there for them, so that we can admonish one another and encourage one another, so we can continue seeking out your righteous glory together, a community and unity, so we can continue being a family, and then we can continue being your bride. We ask and pray these things in your name. Amen.